You concur with him? Okay, thanks. Well, one of the reasons why we do this is to lead into this little bit of so-called lecturing. This will be the only time I really so-called use some kind of scientific lecturing. So you may want to turn around since I'll be using this board here. Yeah. Remembering that this course is called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and so the unpleasant event sort of leads into what is usually considered stressful events in our life. I mean, for the most part, stressful events are considered pleasant or unpleasant? Unpleasant. Unpleasant, yeah. Always? We'll see. No. Okay, yeah, so we'll get to that in a moment. So the unpleasant, stressful events, since you guys discussed it, let's just go through some. If this is the right one, no? So, body sensations. How does a stressful event and the unpleasant event feel in the body? What are some of the different sensations? Calling them out one at a time so I can hear them. Anybody?
Tension. Yeah. Tension.
Tension? Mm-hmm. Any particular place?
In the muscles.
Muscles.
Shoulders.
All over?
Shoulders, neck.
Shoulders, neck. Okay, shoulders, neck. All right, what else? Tension?
Increase in blood pressure.
Blood pressure going up. I'm going to use some medical abbreviation. BP, blood pressure. Okay.
Tightness in chest. Tightness in chest.
Tight chest. Okay. What else? Jaw. Lock jaw. Clench.
The breath gets anxious.
Breath?
Yes, shallow.
So rapid breath. So I'm going to do rapid respiration. That's easier for me. So.
Fatigue.
Fatigue in the body. Tiredness.
Fatigue or?
Fatigue.
Fatigue. The body fatigue. Yeah. What else?
Sweating. Sweating.
Sweating. Okay.
Headaches.
Headaches. So HA means headache. That's a neurologic word. Yes. Anybody else?
Tears. Tears. I don't know. A welling up.
A welling up.
Yeah.
A sense of welling up.
Yeah. Emotional. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to the emotions in a minute, but the feeling in the body is the welling up.
Right.
Yeah.
Sick stomach.
Sick stomach, nausea. Stomach, nausea.
Drowsiness.
Drowsiness. Okay, that's a good one. It's whatever you feel, by the way. There's no right or wrong. It's just when you're stressed out, when you're feeling unpleasant, what goes on in the body. So it's a pretty complete list. You guys, this is good. Anything going on with the bowel, bladder, eyes?
Blurred vision. Blurred vision.
Blurred vision. Okay. Blurred.
Or tunnel vision.
Who's that?
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel. Okay. I think that should be enough. Let's go to. So you see all these. So let's go now to the emotions. Is that what you had said?
Yeah.
Say it out loud.
Extreme emotion.
Yeah. What's the name of some of the emotions you feel when it's unpleasant? What would you call them?
Oh, tears.
Fear?
Tears. Tears like sadness.
Sad?
Anger.
Anger?
Frustration.
Frustration?
Irritability.
Irritable?
Helplessness.
I'm sorry?
Helplessness. Helplessness. Like
Helpless or hopeless?
Oh,
Helpless?
I was gonna say, I said helpless.
You said help?
Could be written up
Oh,
there.
you'll take both?
Sure.
Helpless, hopeless. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it right.
Impatient.
Impatient? A whole list of them.
And some people get passive and passive aggressive.
Passive and passive. Okay, good. Yeah. Passive. Withdrawn like passive, like that thing. Aggressive. And then both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Accusatory?
Blaming, okay.
Blaming.
Is that an emotion? Could it be an emotion? It could be. But we're now going over to the mind. So we could put blaming. Okay. Any other?
Hurt.
Hurt? Like just feeling hurt? Okay, and I'll add shaming. Blaming and shame go together for me. So. All right, in the mind. So I think the accusing may be part. So what does my mind do when it's unpleasant? I begin to accuse. What else goes on in the mind?
Get reactive, so you're reactive, you don't stop.
Reactive?
So it's like,
Reactivity?
it's almost like uncontrollable, hard to control, that you can't reflect, take a moment to pause, reflect, you lose that.
Lose
space.
control? Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, you lose some control.
lose control? Okay, what else? That's good.
Confusion.
Confusion goes on in the mind. Yeah.
Rationalization.
Analyzing, overanalyzing maybe.
Obsessing.
Obsessing
that's all you
over.
think of,
Okay.
Rationalizing.
Rationalizing.
Racing.
Racing. That's good.
Racing.
Racing mind. Okay, racing mind.
You catastrophize. You make things worse.
Catastrophizing, yeah. You guys got it pretty well. You guys are all students in the psychology world, I see. So yeah, so this is a pretty complete list, but there's still probably more, and we don't need to go into them all. So we bring all this up just so I can bring into the discussion a little bit of the science behind the stress response. And oh, it's stressful to get this down. So in the stress response, generally speaking, we said before stress is unpleasant, but as some people pointed, started looking around, say maybe it isn't sometimes. But generally speaking, when we talk about the stress response, we're talking about the fight. And what's the other one?
Flight.
And what's the other one?
Freeze.
Who said it? Say it out loud.
Freeze.
Okay, so everybody heard that one?
No, freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze. And I'll go through them in a moment. But generally speaking, stress, the biology sort of goes with the fight or flight feeling. And we went through some of these characteristics. So you don't need to know all this. Let me preface this. Don't worry about the science and the facts. And it's evolving. So yes, some of it is very well grounded, but some of it is changing. But the fight or flight response is a survival response, right? Does everybody understand that part? It's biological, it's instinctual in that it occurs below the level of consciousness. So when we see a threat to our survival, we mobilize to go into fight or flight. And there's two mechanisms. One is through what's called it's through hormones. So I'll go through that one first. We perceive the threat. So we have to say, okay, that may be a threat, that is a threat, whatever, but at least we believe it is for that moment, or we're going to assume it is. So it has to start with our perception. Remember why we did the 9 dots puzzles in the past? So to point out that perception colors our responses quite a bit, our reactivity. So we perceive a threat, but then subconsciously we trigger, there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, central part of the brain. Its main function, again, you don't have to know all this stuff or whatever, but just its main function, it has a lot to do with the rhythms of our daily cycle. So the sleep-wake cycle, the hormone rhythms, the temperature, body temperature cycles, even some of the monthly cycles are run through there. The hypothalamus is connected directly to what's called the pituitary gland. Does anybody know what that is, the pituitary? Pituitary gland is considered the master gland. It hangs from the brain. It's right behind the eyes. It's in a protective little shell. So it's directly connected to the brain by the hypothalamus. Master gland secretes stimulating hormones to all the other glands, your genitals, your thyroid gland, stuff like that, and also the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are located by the kidneys. So see a threat, hypothalamus tells the pituitary, secretes something, goes right to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland secretes two things, mostly three, or a handful of things, but two things. One's adrenaline and one's cortisol. So fight or flight, stress response. We see something, we think it's a threat, we get triggered, and we put this cascade into motion. And just to complete the stress response, there's another part of the brain called the amygdala. Anybody heard of the amygdala? Yeah? So the amygdala you don't need to know, but again, it's subconscious. It colors our world with importance and emotions, and it's generally in the negative side. So some people think the amygdala has something to do with the fear response and anxiety, and indeed in people with PTSD and anxiety disorders, their amygdalas are more hyperactive. But the amygdala triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is the one below consciousness. It has two sides. One's the accelerator side, which is called the sympathetic side, and the other side is the parasympathetic. It's the brake, slows things down. But when we go into flight or fight mode, we also trigger the sympathetic, the accelerator. So we go into this whole cascade where part of the nervous system goes into action and the hormonal system secretes adrenaline and cortisol. And so, anybody know what adrenaline does? Anybody? What are some of the things?
Increasing your blood pressure.
It elevates the blood pressure. What else?
Increases energy.
Yeah.
Increases energy.
Increases the energy. What else?
Blocks pain, so you can do difficult things.
Blocks pain. What else?
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision. Yeah, it's cortisol too. So, and what else? Okay, you forgot. Blood pressure goes up. It shunts blood away from this area and to the arms and legs and up to the brain so that you can prepare to, as we're saying, the energizing effect is to bring the blood and attention to the arms and legs so you can run away or fight, and to the brain. So the brain has a lot's going on in here. And so what happens to the muscles? They become tense and they can become shaky. Happens to the jaw, it gets locked up. The blood pressure goes up, the heart rate goes up, the breathing goes up. Okay? So pretty much you go in here, sweating happens. The pupils actually dilate. That's different, a little different than the tunnel vision. That sense of welling up, and because it's shunting blood away from here, from the GI tract, from the gastric tract, you tend to get the nausea, the butterfly in the stomach feeling, sensations in here. So that's what adrenaline does. And does anybody know what cortisol does? Anybody have cortisone shots or cortisone? No, anybody who's had cortisone?
Numbs you.
It reduces pain. Yeah. How does it reduce pain? Do you happen to know? Not that you need to know this. Reduces pain by reducing inflammation. So it really is not numbing out like, let's say, Novocaine numbs out. So it affects your inflammatory system.
T cells.
Hmm?
It affects T cells.
Maybe. Yeah, I forgot. I know it affects inflammation. I'll get to in a moment why it's important. It also releases blood sugar, and it changes your fat metabolism so that you have that energy. You use blood sugar in the fatty tissue and all of that. When it goes into the brain, so this is where the tunnel vision comes in, it shuts down the prefrontal areas of the brain where we use rational thinking and decision-making, planning, and impulse control. So under stress, under fight or flight, we lose that part of the brain. as well as our memory centers. Our memory centers are very sensitive to cortisol. The more cortisol you secrete, the more the memory centers, the hippocampus part of the brain starts to shrink. That's the same part that shrinks with dementia and with Alzheimer's. So the chronic stimulation of that area makes it decline even more. And it affects, so it does cause the tunnel vision. So that under stress, survival, you don't want to be sitting there over-analyzing. If there's a saber-toothed tiger coming at you, you don't want to sit there and, is that the guy I saw last week? Look at that, he looks a little different, the tooth is bigger, what's going on? You're making a split decision and getting out. Yes?
I know I must be in the wrong ballpark here, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, at the risk of sounding crazy. Why wouldn't I be converting stress to a motivator and find the solution, get it done, think out of the box, or whatever it takes, a motivator.
So are you asking why you don't do it, or why I haven't discussed
Why
it?
this isn't part of the discussion.
Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet, that's all. So thanks for bringing it up. I just want to finish it up because of what happens with all this, and so leading into that, so traditionally we think of stress as a bad thing. Traditionally we believe it's bad, we talk about it, stress, everybody's stressed, I'm stressed out. The word stress, does anybody know where it came from?
Not silly.
Yeah, and you remember what you know anything about how he brought it up? Or?
Not exactly, but I remember a term that he also, I think, coined called eustress, which was a positive stress.
Okay, so there you go. So it's actually neutral. So Hans Selye was a physician from Canada back in the 30s and 40s. He borrowed the term from engineering. Stress and strain, the stress that you put on a bridge or whatever and all that before it breaks kind of thing. And so he did know that there could be a potential for, there's some use to so much stress before breaking point, the use stress versus what I started saying now, distress rather than stress. And then he went around the world talking about stress, and that's when people started thinking stress is bad, and then people started correlating, finding research about the cortisol and the adrenaline. So the acute stress in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's a survival mechanism. Without it, we probably wouldn't be here, some of us anyway. Certain things have happened in our life. If you see a car coming at you, you jump into this, jump out of the way. And all of these things, we can walk right through what they do. But the issue isn't the acute stress. It's not the use stress. It's not the usefulness stress. It's the chronic release of this stress over and over and over. Not done with an attempt to do something. And even so, because I know a handful of adrenaline junkies that keep doing risky behavior that gets worse and worse and worse over time. But what happens when you have adrenaline secreting, if not continuously, up and down, up and down, up and down over many, many months, if not years? So what happens to your heart rate? What happens to your heart? What happens to your muscles? Anybody?
Takes its toll on your body.
High blood pressure?
Absolutely.
Chronic disease.
And it's a stimulant, so you get anxiety, you get insomnia, it causes the headaches, the muscle tension goes on, the tightness in the jaw, needing the mouth guard, the irritability in the muscles, the shakiness.
Well, that's why we have to continue to repackage it somehow, if it's possible.
Repackage.
The stressor, what's causing the stressor.
What do you mean by repackaging? Say that more.
Look at it differently,
So seeing it differently, perceiving. No, it starts with the perception, right? The perceptions are also tied in with the belief system.
Don't give it the victory. Don't give it the victory. Just don't do it. And I know that's impossible sometimes. I know it's.
Well, the chronic stressors can be both internal and external. If you're fine and suddenly you have a child that gets sick with a prolonged illness, 6 months that you're going to need to be taken care of, it's sometimes stressful to go in, so you have to kind of learn stress coping practices, right? Is that what you're getting at? Like what? Like mindfulness-based stress reduction? Ah, thank you for for the plug. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, because the chronic adrenaline will cause all these things on your heart, and such. And when it shunts the blood away from here, by the way, irritable bowel syndrome and ulcerative colitis and the constipation diarrhea thing. It used to be said stress was a big thing in ulcers. So you can walk through the cortisol. Elevates your blood sugar. If the blood sugar continues to be elevated, you lead to diabetes. Changing your fat metabolism. You ever see somebody who takes a lot of cortisone? They'll gain weight. They'll be puffy all over. It changes the brain mechanism, so it shuts down the areas of critical thinking and the memory centers, leading to memory dysfunction, leading to mood disturbances, depression. And I think the tunnel vision is very interesting. Chronically suppressing and just sort of changing your tunnel vision sort of gives you that loss of ability to see things that may be available, the opportunity cost, if you will. But a lot of mood disturbances and such. And cortisol and adrenaline, when we're getting ready for fight or flight, they affect the immune system in such a way that it prepares you for injury. So if you're going to get cut or beaten up or that, it sends out the immune, so I don't know if it's T cells or B cells or whatever, but so that if you do get something, it'll protect you from getting an infection. And it also tends to clot the blood for the same reason. If you get cut, you want to clot your blood off so you don't bleed to death. But if you chronically elevate that, it messes up your immune system such that you are more prone to infection. So if you talk to people who are chronically stressed out, so if you go to a doctor, keep getting these infections, one of the first things they should ask anyway is, are you stressed out? And the immune system sometimes is altered enough. There's some slight evidence that says it leads to cancers. Chronically stressed out people have a higher chance of having cancer, that kind of thing. And of course, chronically elevating the clotting factors will clot your blood inappropriately, heart attacks and strokes. So getting back to the point that's really well taken, this stress in itself is not a bad thing. In fact, sometimes it's needed for survival. Chronic stress, distress, how we look at stress, leading to all this stimulation, leading to the sense of fight or flight, constantly being anxious, on edge and such, can have a whole lot of health consequences. And generally speaking, that kind of stress feels pleasant or unpleasant? Unpleasant, yeah. And so when we have unpleasant sensations and chronic stress, what do we tend to do that is not so healthy sometimes, some of us anyway?
Drink.
What is it?
Drink.
Drink what?
Alcohol, not water.
Alcohol and what else? What other people do instead of alcohol these days?
Drugs.
Yeah, so substance abuse. What else do we do when we're feeling like that, stressed out?
Overeat.
All right, so you got me going. So now we have the fight, flight, or freeze. So in our world, in my world, in other places, the maladaptive. So these are adaptive. The maladaptive F's. The first one is get F'd up. So that's for the substance abuse. Food. All right, so we said some of the other stuff. What else do you sometimes do when you're stressed out? Anything?
I do exercise.
Fitness.
Some people get violent. Some people get violent.
Get fired?
Violent. Like, violent.
What F is that?
What's that?
Freak out or flip out? Yep. Act out, flip out. Some people go in the other direction. It's running out of time, so I just want to say the sleepiness, the drowsiness, the avoidance, the denying, and we call that forget about it. Forget about it. So we got these F's, and we play around with the mnemonics just to help out, but you don't need to remember. It's just that chronic stress can lead to diseases, actually poor health, a lot of different things, and maladaptive coping behavior. So the question becomes, is working out? What do you think?
I mean, I don't think that's a maladaptive behavior. I think that's probably on the other
So you don't think it's maladaptive? It should be
Yeah.
fight, flight, fitness?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
It can be. People take it to an extreme and bring too much time into it, then it can be a bad.
I guess anytime you use anything as a crutch, I mean, meditation can become that too, in its own way. From a friend of mine just told me she can, I guess
Escapism kind of thing?
escapism,
Yeah.
yeah, so.
All right, so
I would think that the exercise would be a positive channel for that adrenaline, because it wants to do something with all that energy, right? So you're taking it away from your heart and your internals, and you're channeling it to exercise.
So we'll put MBSR,
I should do
yoga,
it 12 hours a day. Right.
exercise. And I think the point's well taken. They seem to be more useful than popping pills, drinking, overeating, the behaviors, workaholism, gambling, shopping. But I think clearly, if done for a reason for escaping from my real life, or instead of my responsibilities, or every time I get angry, I go to the gym, and so I still get angry over here, and I go to the gym, and I don't care, because if ever I get angry, I know I'm going to go to the gym. There may be a sense of neglecting what it is that you're supposed to do about the anger issue, or who that person is triggering you. If you have that sense of, I can go and relieve this, and I'm so holy because I'm a yoga person kind of thing. So, I say that kidding around, but I've seen that. And again, it's the attitude we bring into that. So it was well taken that it's more how we see these things, our belief systems, than anything else.
Television, I guess also.
What's that?
Watching TV, like binge watching. Netflix.
Just plain watching is enough. But yeah, binge watching TV, same kind of thing. Many people do that. I know I've done it many times. I need to veg out and watch this TV, and then the next thing I know, I'm more stressed out. That's what's going on these days. So yeah, so now you're catching on to what goes on here. So even meditation MBSR, I'm going to more and more MBSR, giving more and more and more. If it's done for the wrong reasons, inappropriateness. And one of the, to give you a little bit of a hint if you haven't caught on, one of the things, how would we know if we're doing it for this reason or that reason? So that inquiry process can be part of what we're doing here. We're bringing the awareness into everything we're doing here, and perhaps you'll know. Perhaps by bringing your attention into that discomfort in the foot, it'll lead to other awarenesses of what other activities and motivations we have. So I just want to complete. Does anybody have questions on this or feedback? Remember, you don't really need to do this. We're not going to be doing any more real lectures like this during the class. So you don't need to take notes, and it's not memorized. And I don't tape, even though I'm recording here, I'm not taping this for use of whatever. You can Google this and find out more. But because you guys are so smart, I'll just give you the one more thing. So there's actually one more F. Adaptive F. I doubt anybody knows, but anybody want to give it a shot?
It's adaptive. If you forget, you're able to forget that. You go and you move on. Right?
Forget we put into maladaptive in the sense that if it's a neglecting and avoiding, that kind of stance. I guess you can use sometimes forget, but yeah, it's not quite like that. It's just a little
Freedom.
Seeking
Yeah.
social support, like friends, family.
okay. Friends is good. You're very close. Yeah, and so with all due respect, so the fight or flight research was done after stress came out, and Hans Selye in the 30s, and a whole bunch of stress research came out, and the majority of the stress research was done on male rats and then male humans, which some people think are the same, but I won't go in. In the 90s, they did some research in women under stress. And
Tend and befriend.
what is
So
it?
instead of fight or flight, women tend and befriend.
There you go. So that's the other F, tend and befriend. So I just say for completion, again, it's not nothing, but it was very interesting because the leading edge of the research is going in this direction. Tend and befriend, and these cohorts, they were caregivers of Alzheimer's patients, and I think hospice or intensive care nurses or something like that, but they were all women. And they found that the first thing that women do under stress is go into this situation where they talk to, befriend each other, call up on each other for help. If it's an infant, cooing the infant, holding and nurturing and that kind of thing. So tending and befriending. And the science shows that, so we went over here and we said in the amygdala, the sympathetic accelerator, there's the parasympathetic, it's more like the brake. The parasympathetic, the main nerve there is called the vagus nerve. Anybody heard of the vagus nerve? Who hasn't heard of it? So the vagus nerve, because what goes on in the vagus nerve stays in the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve runs from the brainstem, deep part of the brain, all the way down to the pelvis, but it goes to the heart, it goes through the throat area, and it goes to the lower jaw. So under stress, knowing that something is not life-threatening, like I have to run away and fight or flight, the first impression, the first impulse is to use our mouth, to use our faces, to use our throat, to use our heart. And if you ever, you may have experienced it yourself, I've heard this many times, I go to many meetings, is that I'm so nervous and I can't say, and I can't talk, I'm so nervous, and they talk. Or I'm so nervous and they start giggling. So sort of like that, but you can imagine the tending and befriending coming, because of that vagus nerve being stimulated. So if a threat is not considered life-threatening, you can go into tend and befriend. If it looks like it may be life-threatening, you go into fight or flight. And then the freeze response, if the threat is hopeless, you go into what's called play possum. Shut down completely, pretend you're dead, because even the possum, the predator may actually skip by them. It says, I'm going to be eaten, I might as well play dead. If I die, I die, but perhaps the predator will say, hey, I don't go for dead meat, I'm going off to the next person and go off. But freezing happens quite a bit in people, right? Does anybody ever get under threat and freeze a little bit? Yeah. So it's all connected like this, and now it's known that men do tend and befriend, and women do fight or flight. It's all interconnected. So it's not separated, clean cut, and such like that. So any questions on this? Again, it's not going to come up again. We don't want to talk it out unless you want to bring it up, but it's not something we need to get into. It's just sort of to explain how, from your experience, from your own noticing, your own awareness of all these things that happen, especially in the body. The body's good, what we call it, it's a good stress detector. It doesn't lie to you. It's either drowsy or not. It's either tight or not. So you'll know from the body. The emotions tend to go somewhat with the fight or flight. For instance, the way I put it, in the fight mode, it's the anger. Let's get up and move. In the flight mode, it's the anxiety. In the freeze mode, it's sort of the shame and guilt. And I forgot to mention the maladaptive F for tend and befriend. Give it a shot. Or at least what you think it might be.
It's probably socially isolated, but probably something like F off or something like that. If you're looking for an F.
Another F?